Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik. We're doing our special profiles program out of the National Press Club. We've heard from the civilian panel. We've heard from the Department of Homeland Security panel. And now we're going to hear from our good friends over at Department of Defense. With me on this particular panel today are Tom Michelli, the Acting Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Department of Defense, and General B.J. Shwedo, the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Air Force. We're talking about programs that have been successful, programs you're proud of, things that have happened. Let's start with Tom Michelli. Tom, if I ask you to come up with a program that you've been working on this past year that you're really proud of, that you'd like to share with the audience and our listening audience, what comes to mind, Tom?
Well, I really can't take credit for it, but I'll take credit for the DoD-CIO. We have a cyber scorecard. So about a year and a half ago, we had this thing called a cyber sprint, which turned into a cyber marathon, which turned into a cyber death march, and now it's kind of the new normal of life.
Okay.
And it goes right back to what I first learned in systems engineering software development. You got people, processes, and systems. And at the time, we really had nothing but people. We had some processes and some systems, and the task was to get it together to be able to report on how we were measuring ourselves against success against the cyber sprint things that we needed to do. DoD, if you can imagine, we spend about $40 billion a year on IT, and you have all the stuff that we've already put in, so we have millions, tens of millions of endpoints, tens of millions of users, and keeping track of how we're securing all the things those systems, all the things those people do on the DoD is a daunting task. So we started out pretty much just collecting data calls. In fact, our service components, and we have a fourth estate, which is not the press. The fourth estate is the defense agencies and activities, which is rather large. How they were doing against the tasks they were given. So we started with the people and the processes. We got data calls. We weekly updated a very manually intensive chart. And as we worked with the components and the agencies to realize how we get good understanding of how we were meeting those tasks with measures and metrics, we slowly began automating it.
Okay.
So we went from almost all data calls to adding simple data feeds. So now we have about 12 different systems that are automatically updating the system. We're refining the metrics to make it more meaningful and relevant to how it adds lethality and efficiency to the department. And we're about ready to go into Cyber Scorecard 2.0. And this goes back into people and processes. We're working with a thing called Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, DIUX, you may have heard of that, and tapping into Silicon Valley on how we can make this more real-time, more feeds, more artificial intelligence, machine learning, to have a real risk assessment and cyber resiliency, so how we can fight our networks to bring lethality to our enemy, and to be best partners with our partners.
Wow. You know, we probably could talk cybersecurity for hours. We could talk about all the panels. In fact, we could probably do a radio show every month just on that subject, because it is such a challenge and it is such a high priority and high profile issue right now. What are some of the lessons you learned as you worked your way through these things in order that you'd pass on to your colleagues about perhaps to shortcut some of the things they need to do? So
this is back to the other two panels we've already talked about. So again, back to systems is working with service components, defense agencies to ensure that the systems will tie into a dashboard that is relevant, that is real time, that we work with our partners. So as an example, they call them the Friday beatings, right? So the service components would come in and we say, your scores aren't good enough, your scores aren't good enough. And we realized that we had to bring this up to the chiefs of staff, the senior leaders of the department, and say, hey, you're making mission trade-offs every day, and for good reasons. And we need to show you that you may be making a trade-off that's not being invested into the DoD and the systems of your service component, and you're putting it somewhere else instead. Maybe you need to make a different risk assessment and put some money back into the infrastructure of the SIXs and the CIOs of the different service components and agencies. When we were able to show that and work with the service component CIOs, the CFOs, and the leadership of the department, we got some pretty good traction. In fact, General Shwedo can probably tell you.
I'm the recipient of those meetings, yes.
but now the bidding shifted from the CIO to a service component who's on board with this,
right.
And hopefully giving the service components the money and the resources they need to get things
What's
done.
some of the hardest things, the challenges, the hard things to get done in order to accomplish what you're trying to do? to get the result you're after?
Just the amount of things that that all the service components, so soldiers, sailors, coasties, Marines, airmen are doing to fight the fight, but also have to maintain our network. So the current fight, the future fight, technical debt. We again, all those risk trade-offs as we were fighting wars all around the globe, supporting, I heard FEMA and DHS and others with defense support to civil agencies. All things that we were doing, we were making those risk trade-offs and building up technical debt. So we are reinvesting in that, marking down the technical debt. Ruthless configuration. One of the things the cyber scorecard showed us is, why are we going slow in certain places? And when we got together as a team, we said, if we were on one operating system platform, we could do so much goodness so much faster. So that made the decision to go to Windows 10, which required the partnership of the leadership of the department, both at the mission leaders to the financial leaders, to the CIOs to make that happen.
Right, I do remember when Terry Halverson was on one of our radio shows and said, we're going to Windows 10.
Yeah, so some of the challenges are we had so many diverse systems, we had so much technical debt, we had processes and the different components that were different, and this really helped to coalesce, to align us, give us focus, and move forward.
Terrific. Let's talk a little bit with General Shwedo. BJ, what are some of the a program that comes to mind that you'd like to share with us that you think is really making a difference in over at Air Force?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the programs, and well, especially in the Air Force, if you think about dogfighting, there's an old adage that says speed is life. And that is never truer than in cyber. The bottom line is speed is life in cyber. And we always talk about we need to operate at the speed of cyber. And we're literally in a spy versus spy game every day. The bad guys are wiggling windows, shaking doors, trying to get into our back door. And fundamentally, we have an older construct as background. Our infrastructure was laid down on several major commands. So every major command had a unique infrastructure. We have rolled all of those infrastructures up, but the bottom line is it is really, really hard to start doing something enterprise-wide. And if you are going to get at speed of light, and going back to a dogfight, there was a guy named Boyd, and he said he was the greatest fighter pilot that ever walked the earth, and I don't think I've ever met a fighter pilot that didn't tell me that.
That's right.
But
they probably shouldn't be fighter pilots.
Exactly
they don't
right.
think that way.
But he looked at the world in an OODA loop, and he said, so if you ever hear an Air Force person talk about OODA loops, he said he could break down the actions of that dogfight into observe, orient, decide, act. And whoever does that the fastest, whoever shrinks that OODA loop down the fastest, and then if you're really good, you start introducing errors into the other side's OODA loop and make theirs long and lethargic, and you'll always be inside their turning cycle when you go forward. So when we start talking about operating at the speed of cyber, we started looking at this 600,000 endpoint infrastructure that goes all over the world and said, how are we going to operate at the speed of cyber? And we challenged our folks, and they came up with a program called Automated Remediation and Asset Discovery, ARAD. We love acronyms in the military. Mm-hmm. And we said we need to start getting the back doors of the bad guys and get it incorporated. So going back to Boyd, you first need to know your infrastructure, which, when you have a 600,000 endpoint worldwide, you'll find somebody take a laptop out of their 3-drawer, plug it in, and now your topography that you thought you had yesterday is not what you have today. So it's constantly moving. So we had to incorporate that, and one of the things this program does is rapidly find all of your endpoints, characterize it. Now let's start getting into that OODA loop that we need to remediate. So all of the scan, patch, remediation, if you look at how we in the previous life did this, it would be weeks before we could patch something. And fundamentally, if you're trying to get in that spy versus spy, get inside that OODA loop, you're never going to get there because it's weeks to do this. So part of that program is to also rapidly scan, patch, understand, and then remediate. And we have these things called command cyber readiness inspections. They come from U.S. Cyber Command, and everybody needs to be up to speed on that. It would be a long, lethargic process to find all the things that all the back doors they were looking for, et cetera, and to patch them individually. As soon as we got ARAD up and running, we rapidly found that it remediated and found things very quickly, and what used to take weeks, months, et cetera, is now rapidly being done through ARAD, which, okay, you can sit there and say, well, yeah, that's exercise or that's an inspection,
Right.
but we rapidly came to the WannaCry situation. And while the world was kind of pouting over what happened, we went through that 600,000 endpoint. ARAD was able to patch all those endpoints, and for all the suspicious systems they had, they put it off on the side. It also gives us the capability to start doing holes and honeypots, et cetera, which now you start getting into the other portion of Boyd's OODA loop where you make theirs long and lethargic
Right.
and start introducing errors in there. So fundamentally, it has been very, very successful. In the past, it would take us weeks, months, et cetera. And if somebody finds a back door, you can't let them have that. And you see a lot of the worldwide criminal elements. They'll look for a patch. They'll engineer it, figure out what it's patching, and then they figure they have a window of opportunity to exploit whatever that back door is. Having a capability where you can push enter and then all of a sudden having it all patched, that's when you start getting in the spy versus spy. Not only patching our doors, but then going after theirs. So if they attack us on this side, coming back, and quite honestly, we're seeing that across the Air Force. There's lots of bad guys that are putting back doors because fundamentally, do you really want to buy an airplane, first of all, then train them up to standards to go toe-to-toe with the Air Force, or do you want to look as an asymmetrical attack? That's what we're finding. So what we have to do is find where they're exploiting that back door and then close it.
Right. I can't wait to talk to my grandkids about OODA loops. That's going to be, and I'll tell you what, when they get into the workforce too, you better be at the speed of cyber, because the way they work on those iPads now at very young ages are going to be an amazing challenge
It's funny you say that. So that's one of the bigger parts of my job, is to give our airmen an environment for them to do exactly what you're saying. And I'll tell you, I skip to work every day because our airmen are amazing. And a long, long time ago when I entered, they'd say, well, you do that because we've always done it that way. These guys shrug their shoulders and go, there should be an app for this.
That's right.
And then they create that app, and it waters your eyes. And then, you know, somebody's in your CIO office going, you can't allow this bad behavior to happen. No, 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 I want open architecture to hang that thing on. Now I need to make sure it's secure. But I am telling you, these guys are very, very fast at what they do. And I think that's another thing that I like about ARAD. The way things were being done in DOD a long time ago was you kind of had this big demarcation line between the people that were doing the war and the people that were providing the tools. That demarcation line's gone. I mean, the people that provide tools are in the foxhole with us every day. And the good news is I've got really neat airmen that can sit in the foxhole with the providers and go, no, we need to change happy to glad. And actually, they're fun to be around. I would hold on to my wallet the entire time you're talking to them, but they are very, very good at what they do. And they, in Boyd's OODA loop, they find faster, nastier ways to do business. Wow. And it's really, really fun to be around them.
Fantastic. Well, now, if I ask you about a lesson learned that you'd pass on as you work your way through this cyber speed and speed of cyber, is there something you'd pass on, a lesson learned that comes to mind that you think is worth mentioning?
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, it is teamwork. When you have that large a network worldwide, you need to make sure everybody's on board. And quite frankly, people don't like change. So the younger guys do. Sometimes the curmudgeons, and I find younger gets it, older, very senior people get it. It's the curmudgeons in between. They're usually the ones in my office saying, don't allow this bad behavior. Sometimes we got to kind of sideline those guys and get those the people in there. What's wonderful for me is my leadership encourages the bad behavior. I mean, from secretary, chief, vice chief, all of them go, we need to foster this innovation piece. And it's very helpful for me when I'm trying to remove those curmudgeons to be able to do this. And then, you know, the last part is you start getting these apocalyptic predictions that if you do this, if you run this, the world is going to end. And when you have senior leadership going, BJ, don't worry about it. You do it, and don't accept any phone calls. Send them to me. That's a great, great environment to live and work in.
Yeah, you know, I think it was Robert Kennedy that said that 1/3 of everybody's against everything all the time, no matter what it is, and you know, which makes the culture change issue, you know, such a difficult one to do over time. And let me try to do some sort of summarizing of our show here today. We had Three separate panels. I think panel one, the theme was consolidation, realignment, enterprise approaches. We heard about certifications and how DOJ has attained that certification. Then panel two, we heard, of course, about the updates on the CDM progress and CDM panel. We heard about partnerships. That was the theme there, partnering. We heard it again from both of these gentlemen, the general and from Tom. We heard about the Innovation Lab and some of the things, and we talked about visualization and how important visualization is in order to get messaging across. And from this panel, we heard quite a bit about cyber sprint, cybersecurity, and the automating of cybersecurity, which I think is going to be a tremendous asset for the future. We heard about teamwork and the importance of teamwork to get things done. And just seeing the dynamics between DOD and Air Force, indicating that it requires those partnerships and teamwork to be in.
This weekend is time we don't do teamwork together, and that's when Army beats Navy. But
It's coming up. I could put you guys on the spot. Who wins that game? You're sort of like in neutral, right?
Yes, sir. Well, I every year hope Army and Navy are the best 11-1 teams in the country. So after they play Air Force.
Hey, Tom, who's going to win?
Army.
You know, I love both teams, but I do think Navy's been dominating quite a bit, so it would be nice to see Army pull one off. With that, let me try to first do some thank yous here. Start with thanking our panelists for taking time from their busy schedules to be here to share your ideas. Like OODA loop, which I hope is a word I can now plagiarize and use over and over again, because it just sounds kind of cool. And we need to thank our sponsors, without which we don't have a radio show. So thanks to the sponsors that help make this show happen month after month. Thanks to the great people at Federal News Radio, who are a lot of fun to work with and always do an efficient job and make it easy for us to do the show. Thanks to National Press Club for hosting us here today. We had enjoyed it, the opportunity to be in a different environment. Thanks to Tom Trezza and Trezza Media Group, who I've been partnered with for now 12 years, and just having a real blast doing this program. And most importantly, thanks to our listening audience that for the last 12 years have been tuning in and listening to our show. With that, I want to thank everybody. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. That's it.